about healthy sexuality, and sort of like last week we this is series of newsletters. It's a 3-part series, and maybe, who knows, it'll go further. That's up to Jen. And so we'll keep talking about this. We're going to really dive in deep from last week, where we talked about the 4 principles of eros and healthy expression of it. And when I brought up the 6 elements of healthy sexual development, the purpose of that is to highlight ways in which our early development leads to or shapes our sexual expression or sexuality, and also creativity. Those are one and the same. And so, Jen, what do you think of sort of this week's layout and what's important about it?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that we call this little podcast High Noon with Sarah and Jen, and we do broadcast every Friday at 12 o'clock CST time, and we're trying to be very consistent about that. So we'd love for you guys to come join the channel, hit subscribe, the bell, whatever channel you're on, whatever platform you're on. We'd love to hear from you. Please leave some comments. But back to what you were saying, Sarah, I really do have to say that I am, again, very excited about this, because as you and I go through these newsletters, we talk and we kind of connect more dots, and we think, okay, well, we did this framework, so let's do this framework. And this for me is huge, because I don't think I've ever seen someone use this sort of framework to talk about sexuality and creativity all in the same thing. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I am too. I was sharing with Jen earlier this week, as we're going into, the outlines, the summaries, and putting it all together. I was really happy that she encouraged me to move further on this discussion, because it's not something that even though I work with women, I talk about women's hormones, immune systems, and health and relationships very often. Like, that's sort of the core, matter of my content and what I share. And, from my own personal wisdoms and training and understanding of all of those things, and specifically sexuality is not highlighted within that content. Even though it's folded in, it's not highlighted. And so I've never fully highlighted it this way. And so I was really appreciative, because as we were going through it and kind of getting into the second phase of it, I was like, man, I'm so happy that Jen had me really go deep into this, sort of like the way I would go in deep with a client who's having some of these issues or facing challenges in terms of sexual expression, sexual experiences, and their sexuality. And so this is great. I think it is awesome, and I think you're going to learn a lot. So this week we're going deep into early development and the 6 building blocks. These are the things that in our early development that really shape our relationship with sex, our own sexuality, the way we express it, and the way we experience it. And those 6 elements are sensation, emotions, our sensory development, as well as movement, our needs, pleasure or pleasure play, and our desires. These are really important building blocks in early development that, we all go through all of these development stages, some of which are all they start between, in the womb, sometimes right out of the womb up until 7 years, or from 0 to 2 years old. But the foundation of it really is those 0 to 7 years old, and how you are developing with these blocks are going to shape your creativity and your relationship to sex and your own sexuality. So, and I put this up here, this image, to sort of show you what these development blocks are, and how later next week, what we're going to talk about, we'll go diving into how they then relate to the adult, more mature expression of our sexuality, which is the 4 principles of eros. because they all play into. We have, you know, 4 principles of Eros, and then how we develop in these areas throughout certain developmental stages does affect our relationship to those 4 principles of Eros. And so, just to start it out, in let you know, this is a very simplistic, broken down model, but if we are we're overstimulated in our development in any of these areas, it can lead to what we call the excess, the overdevelopment, the overexcitation, the overstimulation in some of these areas or some of these elements that can lead to things like, you know, excessive strong emotions and mood disorders, pleasure or sex addiction. It could be many things, you know, it's not just sex addiction, it's the addiction to certain experiences, you know, dopamine addiction. Being over-identified with your sexuality, emotional dependency, and invasion of others' boundaries, or a disordered or discombobulated, even confused idea of what boundaries are. And so the underdevelopment, or what I call arrested development, can be a fear of change, limited ability to adapt to change. Can also be seen as a need to control, so it makes one very rigid. So you can lack imagination, creativity, you can have very excessive rigid boundaries. You may be experiencing sexual dysfunction or pleasure avoidance, or the inability to experience pleasure in sex. And we'll talk about that, because there's lots of elements there.
Sarah, just to let you know, on my screen. Okay, you took it off.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure you knew that it was still up.
Yep.
Sorry about
It's
that.
up. Yeah, no, it's fine. So the first element that we start to develop is our sensate development. And so this creates a connection between mind and body. So when we have, you know, when we experience certain sensations and they're followed with like this logical flow towards action, then we learn to trust our sensations. We learn to trust our body. We learn to trust ourselves, and our physical experiences. And we know how to, you know, move through our experiences more confidently. And so they become reliable information. Our sensations develop as reliable information. And so when we experience sensations, again, with a logical flow towards action, we learn to trust them, such as, like, for example, hunger leads to feeding, right? Hunger leads to satiation. If a child is overstimulated, it leads to being soothed, or a soothing activity. When we experience pain, the flow towards being nurtured would be another logical flow towards action. Or if you're cold and you know, your parent or somebody or puts a blanket over you or puts a coat on, these are logical flows towards action in response to sensations. And so when we have a consistent experience of that during this development period of our life, that even after 7 years that remains consistent, then we develop a very healthy, you know, relationship to our senses. We learn to trust them. And so, you know, when we have disruptions to that, for example, that's understimulated, we learn that, you know, there's a distrust, like it's a learned distrust of our own body, our physical senses, our instincts. We learn to disown those. Those are separate. You know, we have a sort of underutilized and therefore an unawakened curiosity, which is, you know, limited creativity and imagination. We have, again, that muted creativity and this mind-body disconnect. The intuition is removed from reality. And just to speak on that for a moment, is that if we have an underdeveloped, our sensate, you know, growth and understanding and exploration. If that's been arrested in any way, for example, the overuse of playpens and high chairs and car seats, and if you're a child that's always being held, mom never let you explore, and dad never took you outside to run, and I'm sure those things occurred. But if you were predominantly kept within a space, the crib, the high chair, the car seat, the playpen, the little bouncy thing, and you were restricted, then you could not explore your sensations. You couldn't fully develop those things. And that goes into movement as well, which is another element of this. And so that mind-body disconnect can lead to a lot of things. So we develop almost an over-reliance to our intuition, because we're not exploring, we're not expanding our perceptive fields of awareness, and therefore we become over-dependent with an overactive intuition, which is then ironically removed from reality. And then, again, we have a distrust of our own body. Now, if we're overstimulated, which does happen as well, we can end up with an overwhelmed nervous system. It can show up in anxiety and mood disorders, a lot of excessive emotional discharge, and fantasies and reality. There's this acting out behavior, a dopamine addiction. Once again, a lot of these are going to be, you'll notice patterns as well. But it's important to pay attention to understand, like, in what ways, in these 6 elements during my development, in what ways did I experience arrested development or even overstimulation of this element in my development. It can help you really get to know how your sexuality and relationship to those experiences was shaped. Next is movement. And so this stimulates our consciousness. It enhances sensory development. And it expands our perceptive fields by increasing our sensory input. And so without movement, we are disconnected from the body. And whether we are over or understimulated, have over or understimulated sensory development, we may then learn to bury our emotions into the unconscious. And that emotions is the next element. And so you'll see how these all connect. They all connect together. And so, for example, someone who's expressing their emotions, have you ever seen them not move, when they're expressing their emotions? Usually, when you're excited, or you're tired, or you're sad, you're anxious, and you're just kind of like moving around. Movement is the discharge of our emotions. And so movement is really important in terms of just also sensations, and movement helps us to express our emotions. And it also allows us to, this is a big one, but it develops our ability to adapt to change. I had to think of a really simple way of saying that. We may not think that our fear of change, or our need to control, or the rigid boundaries that we may keep, and living by certain rules, it has anything to do with movement. But it is. That's where we learn. Because without movement, we aren't changing. We aren't going from the root chakra to the second and third chakra. The root chakra is the structure. It's the stability, where then we move into the second chakra, which is like moving outward, expanding our perceptive fields of awareness. And through that, we're reinforcing our sensation development. And so it's really important. That all is the change, going from crawling or rolling over, to crawling, to inching, to standing, and then, walking and running. That's all change. So you have to move through these changes. There are some clients that I have had that never really crawled. They went from laying, rolling, to them pulling themselves up, and they were walking. And so, they've shared, one in particular I'm thinking of right now, a client who said that my mom always bragged, I never crawled, I just learned how to get up and walk. And so there's that arrested development even there. So movement is all about change. It teaches us, it conditions us through this development to adapt to change. It activates the neuromuscular connection, again, mind-body connection. It expands our perceptive field. And so it's like the sensation plus awareness of the environment becomes a natural movement and flow. So we're learning how to push limitations and also respect limitations with the feedback from sensory input. And it also becomes the foundation for our emotional expression. And so the understimulated movement element in development can be expressed as an adult with rigidity and fear, this fear of change, the need to control, having excessive boundaries. You have muted senses, and you maybe experience musculoskeletal issues like chronic pain, chronic injuries, poor posture. You may have breathing problems, which may not just be from the chest. It may be the lack of movement and development in the jaw, the craniosacral, like upper spine, and is not having that. So like that one client that went from laying to pulling up and walking, she never had that movement where you inch. And then, even you're crawling and doing the reptilian crawls, you need that movement. And that may have arrested the development of this part of her body. That can lead to breathing issues and chewing issues and dental problems and things like that. So if that part of your development was muted or arrested or understimulated, you may be experiencing musculoskeletal problems, issues, or perpetual. Because it also, what does movement do? It leads us to go from the root chakra of stability to the second chakra of we're moving upwards from the root. So now we're learning stability, right? And then we move into the coordination. So without the stability and the coordination, we may be prone to some injuries, walking into a lot of walls. So we're overstimulated. I see this more in millennial parents who have kids, is because the millennial parents are usually the ones that had restricted movement. So they then go the other way, and they're like free range kids all the way. Just let them do what I let them explore. And those kids are now, in their teens and early 20s, and you can see it now. There's poor boundaries, invasion of others' boundaries. There's this dopamine addiction. There's lots of ADHD, kind of living in a state of confusion oftentimes. There's a lot of emotional disconnect, even though there's emotional discharge. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of emotional discharge because they're moving, but they didn't have the proper development that was consistent with stimulating movement development simultaneously to emotional development. So they're expressing emotions, but they don't know what those emotions are. They don't know how to identify them. And so you'll see that coming out. It's a lot of like impulsive, erratic, and that's the extreme side of it. There are subdued levels of that overexpression, but a lot of it is this ADHD, can't sit still, can't concentrate, can't focus, can't retain information, moving on from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And so this is it's a really important one. We go from the sensate to the movement, which then simultaneously shows up with the emotional development. And this is the instinctual movement of psychic energy and learning to organize our feelings into a language. A lot of time people get confused. Feelings are not our emotions. And sort of like I was trying to explain to Jen, I was creating this image. I wanted to have a visual so that it would make sense that our feelings are related to our sensations. So when we sense something, peripheral or whatever it is, we have a sensation that produces sort of this instinctual feeling. And so when we are developing in our early development or early development with the emotional block of that development, we're learning how to organize our feelings into emotions. So if our sensation was a word, feelings would pour out as like a sentence, sort of like this current of a sentence, and then the emotional development as a child, we learn how to express it. That would be the paragraph. So the sensation is a word, feelings are the sentence, and our emotional expression is the paragraph. So the emotions, this is the first language we learn how to speak as children. Like the first thing we learn is the language of our emotions. And this is often very much disrupted in development, not in a mean way. Certainly there are traumas and abuses that lead to unarrested development of our emotional expression and understanding and organizing principles of putting feelings into these categories that we can express and communicate. But there's enmeshment. And when we say enmeshment, the parent is enmeshed in the child. So the child, it's very unconscious, most of the times very unintentional. It comes from good intentioned parents. So if the child is screaming, throwing a fit, to the parent, the child is not mirroring what the parent wants the child to express. The parent doesn't want the child to be upset or angry or frustrated. So the parent will then enmesh in the child by trying to condition and teach the child that's not how we express ourselves, or that's not what we get upset about. And if you're frustrated, instead take a deep breath and say please. It's all very well intentioned, but if it's a very conditioned, very consistent programming, then we learn that our emotions are not separate from our parents' emotions. And then as we get older, we want to express in the ways that we can predict the parent, the teacher, the pastor, the mentor, the friend. We then begin to mirror their emotions. So we become hypersensitive to how others are feeling, but we don't know how we're feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you gave that example actually, because that was when I was going to ask you a question about that, like giving real life examples of how
Yeah.
how it changed, like how these different areas are changed, or
Yeah.
um, yeah, how they evolve into
Yes.
overstimulation or understimulation.
Yeah. So, for example, my husband Alex, he grew up. I mean, it was a cultural thing. Russians are very stoic. They're not emotional people. Not even the women. The women, uh, especially married women, learn that the emotions, when you express emotions, it's only with other women. It's not appropriate to express emotions or be emotional around men or the husband or the father. And so it's a very stoic culture. And that's how Alex grew up. And so he is still to this day very hypersensitive to how others are feeling and their emotions, even when they're not expressing them. However, what he had to do for years was work on, because I noticed this about him, like, you certainly know what I'm feeling, how are you feeling? And it was like this difficulty, this challenge to identify what he's feeling. His face and how he expressed himself, the again, arrested development in the movement area, he only could express emotion in two ways. Like, he would have this look of disgust, or he would just be smiling a lot. And it was just these two modes, but there were many emotions, and he didn't realize that that look of disgust was always signaling to people around him that, like, he's angry at him. But
Hmm.
when really he's like, really just wanting to be like, oh, man, I didn't want to do that. All right, I guess I'll do that. But instead, he would have this look of disgust, look of anger. and contempt. And so he had to learn again, like through movement and expression and really going deep into like what that was. And so again, emotions are really important because for him in growing up and for everybody, the most common emotional environment that you are exposed to becomes your emotional identity, which is it's part of what makes up your core complex identity, your whole identity. So that core identity and the emotional identity fits in like a little puzzle piece. And so then we seek out all familiar situations and experiences that will then reinforce that familiarity, those familiar emotions. And so for him, it was, an environment of either we're really happy and silly, or we're disappointed and we're angry. Those were his familiar emotions. And so he never learned the range of motions and like the rainbow of feelings that get categorized into these emotional expressions. And so it took a lot of work for him to uncover, what is he really feeling? He's not mad, but everybody around me thinks I'm mad. So let's figure out, like, what am I feeling? So and he still works on that, because again, 37 years old, he started working on it about 7 years ago. It takes a lot of work, and so this one's really important. So we learn how to express it, which through expression, again, movement, and then it becomes words, it becomes communication, which then helps us to develop the ability to also hear. And then we develop empathy and compassion and love and trust and safety and all of those things that can either be overexpressed or underexpressed, under supported in a development. And so understanding and empathy is really important, as well as aliveness and passion. And so aliveness, passion, that can come in the form of excitement. It can come in the form of anger. And so if we grow up in a household like I did, where we don't get angry, that's inappropriate. It's violent. It's not pleasing to God. And so a lot of things would get swept under the rug because we avoid confrontation, we avoid anger, because anger leads to things that could be seen as sinful. And so anger was something I always had a difficult time with, because when you have the instinctual sort of that electric charge of eros in that second chakra, and you've got an aliveness of passion, a passion for this, passion for that, but stunted anger, that doesn't go anywhere. It builds up. And so you can see a lot of issues from that as well. So if that's suppressed, you can,
And right? It ended up being physical. It turned into physical manifestations for you, or was there a lot of relational components to that too?
When not being able to be angry, of course, you don't talk back to your parents. Having an attitude, being sassy. There wasn't a separation or a distinction between expressing your anger and being disobedient. So anger was, for me, that's disobedient. That's a no. And so that suppressed anger would then come out in me and turning against myself. So I ended up with an autoimmune disease. So that those emotions don't go anywhere. Just because you don't express them, acknowledge them, they stay. Eventually they build up. It's like, your hair clogging the shower drain. Like they don't just like go away. Like you got to get it out of there, or plug it, or whatever you got to do to, like, be able to clean all the hair out efficiently. and however which way you want to do, but there are healthy ways to express anger, frustration, and there are healthy, unhealthy ways to do it. You know, being angry and dehumanizing someone is an unhealthy way to express it, but being angry and voicing and articulating that something disappointed you and that you're upset, that's healthy. But at the same time, too, I had a lot of passion. Of course, that may relate to me being the youngest, the quintessential, stigmas of the youngest child. I was very expressive and very stubborn, and excitement was also inappropriate. And you got to be a lady, cross your legs, hands folded, quiet, don't interrupt, things like that. So these are all things I learned. These were certain rules that I didn't get like disciplined or in like serious trouble or spanked or anything like that. If I broke the rule, it was just shame. There was shame around it. And so that energetic pulse of passion, no matter how it gets expressed, it's part of your aliveness. It's your vitality. You're discharging this energy, and when you're suppressing anger and excitement, it has to be discharged somewhere. But I was not ever really able to do that until after I was about maybe 13, 14 years old, and it did manifest as an autoimmune disease. The emotions, everything stayed in there. And then eventually my body just began to attack itself because it couldn't contain these emotions that were not emoting. They were not moving. And so they just began to turn against me.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. I think that's really important for people to understand that, we just think it's either genes or something I didn't work out. They don't relate it to their actual development.
Yeah. Yes, all of these are really important to understand too. Emotions, I could spend months with a client on this. But sort of the way we've summarized this out, I think it's great to give others a format to just kind of, do some internal sweeps, some inner work, some, inventory of all 6 elements. And if emotions are one of them, like just do the inventory, see where you feel it. Do you feel it in your body? A lot of things, again, it goes back. Emotions are the instinctual movement of our psychic energy. Like they are, and our most familiar emotions during development are going to become our emotional ID, which is then a part of our core complex of our identity. And so we will then want to surround ourselves or seek out events and experiences and situations that are energetic fields to those familiar emotions. So we may be doing that unconsciously. If you lived and grew up in chaos, you may unconsciously be drawn towards experiences that are chaotic, relationships that are chaotic, because that is familiar to you, even though consciously you don't want that, you don't like it, but it became your familiarity. And so that's what you're going to always be drawn to, is seeking that out. So again, it's important to do an inventory of our emotions to understand like what we're creating in our lives and what circumstances we are unconsciously creating based on our emotional environment that created that familiarity, thus our emotional identity. So if we want to stop recreating certain experiences or circumstances, that's really important to do an emotional inventory. Like,
I feel like we need to write a workbook for this.
well, we've got all the content. It would be great. If you're watching this, you want a workbook, just give us a vote. Let us know. We'll put it together. And so, again, going back to what I said earlier, the first language we learn to speak are our emotions. And so those will, guide us towards situations and things that matter the most to us. So, if we, have that aliveness, that passion, that's important in terms of the emotional expression and development, because passion is, and we'll get to this later too, when we talk about desire, is related to that last element of or the second to the last element of development, which is desire. And so passion is sort of like the radiating aura of desire. So that it's there. We don't want to suppress it. If it's been suppressed, we need to revisit it. Take ownership of that back. So we learn to disown our excitement, disown our anger, which is the passion. Then we can become very avoidant. The avoidant relationship attachment styles. We're apathetic. We could be very pessimistic, which I was for my entire life. I will say pessimism ruled me until I started doing a lot of this work. And now I just kind of go to cynicism with humor, like, humorous cynicism. And so that was my way of like integrating that pessimism into just like funny cynicism. And while learning how to express anger and express my excitement and passion, still working on it. And so when this is also the emotional development of this first language is suppressed, we experience a lot of pleasure denial. Pleasure and play being our that last element in development. We have a fear and a distrust, not only of ourselves and what we're feeling, but we have a fear and distrust of our environment, right? So we rely on what other people are feeling. We rely on how they're expressing themselves to tell us what our environment is, what our experiences are, and the role that we play in that. And then we have repressed sexual feeling again. And if you're an introvert, it may not be because you have arrested emotional development. Some people just are introverted. Some people are extroverted. But this is a very common one. If you have extreme introversion, isolation, social anxiety, and things like that, very, very common in those who had arrested development with the emotions and expression and that language in their home. So, and the repressed sexual feeling is like this repressed urge and disconnect from our sexual instincts. It's a total disconnect. And so if we had excessive expression, again, I'm talking to you again, millennial parents. I don't mean to badger you, but we have lots of psychological reviews on many studies over the generations, and the one in which the millennials gave birth to are showing up the most with an overstimulated movement and emotional development. And so what we're seeing is sort of these intense emotional states, reactive, impulsive, this social dependency. They find themselves they identify with social interactions. They identify with their intimate partner, like that. They depend on that to be alive because they're always discharging and they need something to discharge it to. So they're very, social dependent. The increased stimulation and charge of excitement can lead to a lot of things like just impulsive, obsessive, compulsive kind of behaviors that that's their familiar, that's their natural, very organic way through which they developed, is to just discharge without having any sort of filter and understanding of it. And so you can see that a lot, again, with ADHD, anxiety, mood disorders, less with depression, but more with like anxiety. I wouldn't go too clinical with schizophrenia, bipolar. There's a lot of things that go into that, but it's just this need to discharge without truly an understanding. Again, going through like how to organize our feelings into an understanding of what we're emotionally experiencing. And then they can end up with like a sex pleasure addiction. And when I say sex addiction, some people don't like that word, but what I mean is there's this unchecked motivation to experience a thing. And so you can call it addiction, or you can call it the unchecked motivation to experience a thing with an impulsive drive to continually behave out or act out that thing to achieve that thing or experience that thing. That's why I choose the word addiction. It's just easier to say. But it's this, you may not be like addicted in the sense you have to have sex every day or several times a day, or you have to masturbate all this time. But sex is seen as a thing to, it's a check mark to discharge. You got to discharge this psychic energy. You're not filtering it. You're not understanding what it is. Yeah. So when I did this, I wanted to, sort of visually show that the sensation that activates with a feeling, that sensation activates a feeling. So it's not always just a smell, taste, sound, any of the intuition is part of that sensation, sensing. We have peripheral sensations. We have the touch sensations. All of those things then can generate a feeling or a palette of feelings. And when we learn to express the emotion we're experiencing behind that, we're organizing those feelings. And so the paintbrush sort of symbolizes the movement of that. So we've got the blank canvas, then we're charged by the sensation that produces these feelings. So we pick up the brush, and to move those feelings, we then have this beautiful painting. That's the expression of our emotions. So those emotions is the ability to express what we're experiencing. Feelings are just the combination of colors from what we're sensing. So then we organize it all, and we paint, we blend some things together, and we create this beautiful picture of the emotional experience of what we're feeling. So that was the way I could visualize it, or put it into a visual representation, so that people understand feelings and emotions are not the same. Feelings are very instinctive, and they're not factual all the time. As you'll see, again, follow these patterns here as we talk about it. So needs are the next. Again, these are just, this is the fourth, element in our early development that is going to shape our relationship to sex and sexual experiences and sexual expression. So needs are just necessary, uncompromising requirements for healthy human functioning in all of our systems. And sex is one of them. So we have the four bodies: our physical body, our emotional body, our mental body, and our spiritual body. And the physical body, it needs, obviously, nutrition and water and sunlight and air, breath, movement. It needs sex. It needs that part of that instinctual sexual instinct to be. And so when we have a healthy development in our early childhood and then consistent throughout our life of about our needs, we learn about independence. We become self-reliant. That our needs are not projected onto others. We know how to fulfill our own needs. We learn about accountability, self-fulfillment. We're able to separate needs and wants. A lot of times when there's this over stimulation or over development, I would say almost like the loose development around the needs as a parent to a child, and just always trying to predict what your kid needs and just give, then they don't know how to decipher between what I want and what I need, because everything I want becomes what I need. And that's really important. So if it's suppressed during development, then you disown the self. You confuse needs with a want, and in excessive, you confuse a want with a need. So when it's suppressed, you think what you need is just, it's something you want. It's you can compromise on that. Needs can be, you can end up feeling guilty or ashamed for needing something. It may be expressed in an adult as someone who's very sacrificial, sort of like martyrdom. You experience pleasure denial. You're a people pleaser. You may have fear, shame around sex and pleasure, and things that are enjoying life, exhilaration and things like that. You may have some fear, shame, or um, you know, uh, disinterest, almost dulled senses around that. And if it's excessive, it's like giving a child everything he needs, everything they want. You don't want, you have a parent, um, maybe even a mother who grew up, development was suppressed in the needs, and then the pendulum swings the other way, so she doesn't want her child to experience, or father doesn't want his child to experience what they experience. They give them everything they want, everything they need. And that's an exaggerated form, but like also without discernment, then the child learns that, um, you know, there's no difference between want and need. So what they want is what they need. There's this disillusion. What I want is what I need, and if the need is not met, then there's this frustration and victimhood. So there's they lack empathy, they lack the understanding, they lack this idea that we don't get to have everything we want, and that there's a difference again to the want and the need, and so that now we're entitled to it, and there's almost a subtle development of narcissism, and everybody on some level has narcissistic traits. And those who are overdeveloped or have excessive development in the needs element growing up, they may have higher levels of narcissistic traits. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you an evil person. I know the word narcissism has just been thrown out so much, especially in the new age conscious communities and things like that. We all have narcissistic traits. All of us do. Some of us who don't, it's still there. It's just in the shadows. It's unconscious. You haven't found it yet. We're all narcissistic, and that's okay. Even if you have higher levels of narcissism, it means there's some level of entitlement because you don't know the difference between a want and a need, and there's a level of not being able to empathize with others and understanding what their needs are, and if those conflict with your needs, how it's not an attack on you. And a lot of this stuff, just even if you have higher levels of narcissism, doesn't mean that you're like doomed and this is a life sentence. Like, there are ways to work with this. It's just a lot of people don't want to acknowledge and embrace those traits of themselves because it's just been badgered so negatively in media and industries and things like that, especially therapy and family court and divorce and relationships. It's the word narcissism and the idea of it has just been badgered so much that even if you do have narcissistic traits, you don't want to admit it. But I will say that the more you deny it, the larger your narcissism grows, just so you know. So yeah, they can be very self-centric and pleasure-driven. Because again, not knowing the difference between a want and a need is the want is you're chasing pleasure. Nothing wrong with that. But if it's not balanced with the understanding and separation of is this needed, you could be very pleasure-driven and again, have this obsessive attachment towards seeking out pleasure. And even to the degree of minimizing or even exaggerating your needs that are necessary just in order to experience it in a pleasurable way. So then we move on to desire. Desires is, I think I was sharing earlier, really, really important. Um, there's, well, these are all important. I should just say, these are all important. They're all connected, and it important to do an inventory on all of them and understand your own development and where you may have overexpressed or underexpressed levels of these different elements. But when we look at our needs and not knowing the difference between needs and wants, someone who's like excessive overstimulated in the needs element during development, that's important when we move into desire, as well as those who had arrested development through the needs element of growing up. Because desire is not want, it's different. Wanting and desiring are different things. Desiring goes back to where I was sharing in the emotional element. It's the passion, it's the aliveness, it's that pulse that you feel, and it there's a current that's moving through you at all times, and the current that activates or sort of charges this desire is very much related to the need, because when desire is activated, we have a need to fulfill it, and so it's very instinctual. But it's also when you're connected to that, you know that it's something I need to attain, something I need to arrive at. Whereas something you want is something you want to obtain. You want to have the thing, and so it's really important to understand that when with needs, desires, as well as the first three. You know, the sensations, the movement, the emotions. So you can desire, you can want what you desire, and you everything you desire, you can want that, but you can't desire everything you want. And so I'll explain the difference between those. So the desire is sort of the pulse of your spiritual will, and the pulse of it, sort of like the heart beating, you know, the drum, the rhythm of your pulse or your blood pulsing through your veins, like that's desire. It has meaning and it has purpose. So that meaning and purpose like activates that aliveness, that passion within you, that then it's sort of like plugs the, you know, the charger in. So then we've got the electric current, we've got the electric charge, and the current is the emotions that are moving, again, movement through, where the electric charge is like the sensations of it. And so, you know, looking here, it's, you know, you've got this pulse, this need to fulfill something. If you are lacking purpose, you're lacking a meaningful purpose for something, you're gonna get that pulse. And so if you have an empty battery of meaning and purpose, and you have an over excessive development in your needs, and you know, that connection to your needs and emotions, right? That's overactive. You're going to sense this pulse, but you there's no meaning and purpose behind it. That's a want, but you'll have the illusion it's a passion driven desire for something. So a lot of people who have that mistake the pulse of desire as a need, and identify it as this is a purpose, it has meaning, it's an illusion. And that's really, really, really important. And that's when you start to do that inner work and that shadow work, and you're investigating, you know, and questioning your motives, and you're doing an inventory on your own development and what you learned, and you know, you're trying to shine a light on the unseen parts of yourself. This is really important and can get sticky when it comes to desire. So, you know, a healthy development with desire, again, it separates want, which is to obtain something, from an attainment. You know, desire is a destination. right? So it comes with a lot of charge to move us toward that destination. And so it inspires us to move towards greater, more positive and pleasurable experiences that are, um, fundamentally connected to the underlying need of the spiritual will. And the spiritual will always has a purpose and meaning. And so the harmony of the need, sensation, and emotion, plus the movement of it, is driving us towards pleasure. And again, we often get a distorted understanding or idea of what pleasure is. Pleasure is arriving at a destination that is meaningful and fulfills a purpose. That's probably the most pleasurable experience you can have, is knowing you have a vision and you have a purpose that is meaningful, and you arrive at that destination. The most pleasurable experience you can have is that fulfillment. And so that's why I use that battery. It's like the battery is now full. That's the pleasurable experience that you're driving towards. And the reason this relates to sex is because sex also is a pleasurable experience, and you want to have greater experiences in sex. You want to have greater experiences with pleasure and your sexual expression and your sensuality and, with your partner. And so if we are not working towards that, sex is not charged. It's a set of movements. And so when we have this suppressed, which is very, very, very common in most generations from, I'd say, Gen X and backwards, desire was a no-no. Desire is seen as, and some early parts of the millennial generation too, there was guilt and shame around desire. It's seen as sinful or wrong or selfish. It's a distraction. It's going after desire is it's like you're distracted from this. That's just, it's lazy, it's selfish, it's sinful. All of those things that we learn is like, it's not good. But overall it's seen and conditioned as a selfish thing to do. We can't just move towards desire. We got to think about the family. We got to think about our friends, the classroom, our environment, the community, and our place in it is not to move towards desire. We're taught and conditioned that our place is to perform our responsible deeds to fulfill the overall needs of the community, the overall needs of the family or the classroom or whatever it is. And so our desire gets stunted, it gets suppressed, and that can show up with like an avoidance of pleasure, almost like a discomfort, like an awkwardness around pleasure, including sexual pleasure. It can show up as like this lack of excitement, this lack of, this spark. We have our dulled senses, the sexual dysfunctions, like, so I forgot what the percent was, that there's a certain percentage, say 87% is what, don't quote me, but it's up there. It's 80 something percent. And I think it's 87% of women cannot reach orgasm during penetrative sexual intercourse. Women cannot, 87%. And that's right here. This will explain it. So if you're one of those women who has to use a vibrator or clitoral stimulation prior to, during, or after penetrative sex, let's look at this. This is time to investigate here. And same with men, like not able to keep it up longer or long enough, or have a hard time getting aroused, staying aroused, this same thing. So then dulled senses goes hand in hand with this, because sensational development, you are exploring, you're discovering what feels good. We don't want to touch the hot stove anymore. What do we want more of? We want more of pleasurable experiences. And if that is stunted, that's going to show up here too. And then, yes, of course, this lack of vision, lack of creativity, muted imagination, it's the inability to really tap into that. And so we disown our sexual instinct and we prioritize work over play. And then again, there we go to the opposite in the excessive overexcitation during this development and this element of desire. Your wants are overcharged as an illusion of desire. There's a lot of emotional enmeshment, meaning not just the parent, but if you are overexcited in this development with desire, you then become the enmesher. You want others to mirror what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, what you're wanting, what you desire, like that. You enmesh others into that with you, and when they don't mirror that, it is felt as a rejection, as an abandonment, and that can be very painful. It can hurt emotionally. It can show up as compulsive, impulsive behaviors, fantasy over the needs of reality. So over expressing desire, over identifying with your desire while not understanding the difference between want and need and desire, is you're in this la la land, which then you're always, it becomes a dopamine addiction of it. It's you're always seeking out, pursuing, needing higher elevation of experiences. Experiences have to be experiences. Like you can't just sit down and play chess with somebody. It's got to be a whole experience. You got to take a drop of MDMA with it, and or maybe smoke a little pot and light some candles, play some music, turn up the bass. It's just, you can't just sit down and play chess with a friend. That's how that shows up. It just overrides your system. Your intuition, again, it's removed from reality. Which is sort of a check mark of when your sensate development is understimulated. You have an overactive intuition, but it's removed from reality. But in this case, it's an excessive. So, obsessive behavior, pleasure-driven, addictive behaviors. You're always looking for the peak experience, peak. And you just keep going to reach that peak experience, and it's play over work. Whereas the deficient, the underexpressed, is work over play. So we need the balance of that. Desire is a destination; it's not a thing. And I see this show up a lot. I think Jenna was talking to you about that a little bit prior to this. Is I see it show up a lot in my early career. It was in the health and wellness communities, and peers and professionals that I worked alongside with, influencers, authors, things like that. In the health and fitness is this need to reach a peak performance, peak experience of something. It's not a destination. It's to have this body, to have this influence, to have these muscles, to have this health. There's no journey. It's just a checklist of I'm doing XYZ to have this thing, rather than acknowledging the desire to arrive at a destination, to attain the fulfillment of something that is very purpose driven, meaningful. And then as my career evolved, working with a lot of people, with their, postural dysfunctions and chronic pain and hormone issues and gut issues, with nutrition and corrective exercises and things like that, I began to notice there is a metaphysical relationship between a lot of these physical symptoms. And so evolved my career into more of analytical psychology, philosophy, a lot of applied Jungian methods, and sort of started taking things, as I guess my family would say, to a spiritual level, which could may be accurate, but it's more of like bringing the psychic elements, the psychic origins of what can be showing up and physically in our bodies. And so as I moved that way, I began to become more familiar and connected to peers and professionals in the esoteric or I guess, professional therapy working groups and, you know, the conscious communities. Uh, yeah, the new age kind of stuff, I guess you could say. And what I see coming out in that too is that when others are dabbling in the new age or esoteric sort of um, divinity practices, that could be plant medicines, that could be certain chemical substances, that could be certain rituals, and working with symbology and dreams and all of that, pulling psychic images out in these different types of modalities. What I'm seeing is that if we don't have a grounded understanding, sort of the prerequisite to jumping into those experiences and those journeys, we don't have the prerequisite of looking and investigating where we are prior to going in, then what may show up, we won't understand fully. We may be given some information, but if we don't know what, if we don't investigate and do that inventory of like, I'm starting from this, here are my ingredients. Now I'm going to go drink 10 cups of tea in the jungle and all this stuff shows up. We don't know what it's related to. We're just getting inundated with this peak experience, and we don't know how to make sense of it. We don't know how to organize it. And if we don't know how to make sense of it and organize it, then we don't know how to integrate it. And there's a lot of talk about integration in these communities and in these professions, but I don't see it often actually applied. I talk about it, but I don't see it applied. Even the ones, I'm not naming names, even the ones that talk about it the most, the biggest influencers, many of whom I know, many of whom have hired me, they talk about it a lot. They're not doing it. They're not doing it. And you can tell when you see the way they live their lives. If everything has to be a peak experience, then they are a living, walking shadow of the dysfunctional, you'd say, desires development. It's very dysfunctional. And that may have been in the shadow, but now it's not. And now they don't think it's the shadow, but it is. It's just, it's autonomous now. And so this is something where desire can get activated during these experiences. And I call them peak experiences because they are very sacred. Many, many times, just very sacred, no matter what you decide to do. LSD, mushrooms, MDMA, hape, or, ayahuasca, whatever it is, if you're doing any sort of substance or plant medicine and doing the journey, as you say, you have to understand you are going to experience something that is going to really stimulate whatever was suppressed or whatever was over expressed in you. You're going to stimulate it, you're going to activate it, and you're going to see it come to life. If you don't know how to handle that, it can create a lot of problems that lead you to now depending on these peak experiences, using these substances in order to continue to experience those things. And you create the shadow as its own autonomous being expressed through you, and you're not even aware of it. So I'm saying you should be very careful with those things, be very intentional and mindful and understanding of before you jump into that. Know what ingredients you're working with and know what ingredients are missing, because when things show up, you can tell the difference. So does that all make sense, Jen?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think if you're watching this, a lot of people can probably relate to, you know, pieces of this to themselves, or maybe they've worked through the part of their shadow that's coming up, and but maybe this gives them another framework to look at things. Like, that's what I always love about what you talk about, Sarah, is you tend to give a perspective that people don't necessarily know about themselves or see on the internet or wherever they're looking for information. And I would like to point that out, that you are very good about giving people a perspective to look at themselves without actually giving them the work to do. It's just, it's angling it so that they understand that they should be possibly looking at it from other directions.
Right. Yes. I mean, absolutely. And I'm not always the person to help you out with that. So even though I'm helping to sort of like open doors and like brush away some of the illusions that may be there by giving you opportunities and suggestions or implications to look at certain things, if a lot of times there's some people come to me and say like, okay, I thanks for that information, now what can I do about it, can I work with you, and then I get more information from them. I'm not always the person to help you with that. I know all about this, I know a lot of things about this, but sometimes there are things where it's like, out of integrity, I need to refer you to this person who really just specializes, is just, you know absolutely a master in the field of what you need, prioritize you in a priority of like what you're needing. Like, this is the person that has mastered that and you would get the most out of. And so it's, again, just like me, anyone who's telling you things on YouTube or Instagram or any social media that inspires something doesn't always mean they're the person to help you fix it. If you're looking for coaching or therapy or mentorship or anything like that, reach out to them. If there's someone of high integrity, they'll be honest and say, yes, I can help you. Or they may say, like, I know someone who's way better at this. But it is important to always be the student. Always be the student, always be the seeker, always question your motives, the motives behind your wants, the motives behind your desires. Um, Wanting is not wrong. Having a desire is not wrong. Expressing or fulfilling your needs is not wrong. Where we have to look into those things is what motivates those things, the motivations behind them. And I can share that with you, and I can oftentimes help walk someone through that, but sometimes it takes more. It takes someone else that understands that path that they've walked, and I have not. So, use discretion when you're exploring these things. Again, exploring is not wrong. You want to do plant medicine, you want to do MDMA, you want to have some fun and pleasure, play, experience, like, we seek pleasure. There's nothing wrong with that. We want to question our motivations. Austin is a hot spot for people in the conscious community who are the seekers. They are always looking to improve themselves, develop themselves, become more spiritually connected, more consciously and loving through their intentions in their work and their businesses and their coaching and the craft that they're mastering or developing. Like, Austin is amazing, just bed of people just wanting to better themselves. But what I have seen is sort of the possession. They become possessed by it, not driven by it. Does that make sense? Just
Absolutely.
like, yeah. So like an example is when you see all of these, teachers, influencers, sort of like um, the leaders, the thought leaders of the community in a public setting. Say there's a party or a celebration or a big event or a conference, and you go, and everybody there is enmeshed. And what I mean by that is they can't just attend a party, they can't just attend events with other thought leaders. It becomes very egocentric. Everybody is dressed to the nines, they got tons of body glitter, and lots of adornments, if they're wearing anything at all. They're passing around hot bay and MDMA and like candy, like on a platter. That's being passed around. And that is the emphasis through certain peak experiences, where the shadow of being disconnected or disowning your own body, disowning your needs, disowning your emotions got revealed. And now the only way for you to experience that is through drugs, which you call medicine. And I see that all the time. And the only way we can continue to emphasize and experience those things that we had suppressed for so long, and early development, not to our fault, but the arrested development or the overexcitation of it, that shows up with like having to, dazzle yourself out and wear the cloaks or whatever the costume in your mind that you believe is going to mirror those. That's enmeshment. It's a community that is built on enmeshment of each other, of this idea of this possession of this spiritual growth, and it can be dangerous. And I also know a lot of great people who just enjoy it, and that's also okay. Because if you are questioning your motives and you understand and you're honest with yourself about these motives, and you're like, well, the motive is I just want to have fun. I like to dress up. I like to decorate my body, and I like to experience certain states of psychic energy through dabbling in this type of substance or this type of substance. And when I'm around other people, like it emphasizes that experience, and that's my form of play. If that's the case, that's great, and there is nothing wrong with that. And I am able to witness and observe, point out very easily who those people are, the ones that are very honest with themselves, and they're there to play. And then there's a lot of times a larger group of people that are enmeshed, and they're there to perform because they are possessed by it. So just be careful with that. Just be very, very careful with your energy too around that. So speaking of play, this is our last element. And one of the, probably as every person and person I'm speaking to now that's listening or watching, play is probably one of those greater, I could say, like, parts of your memories, right? Play, you can easily look into your memories between 0 to 7, 7 to 12, and remember the things you used to play. You remember the stuff you loved to do that brought you joy. You really were just things that you were just so excited. You ask any kid who's like 6, 7, 8, like, what's the favorite part of your day? What was your favorite? Recess, right? Because that's where you balance work and play, is recess. And so every child is going to tell you recess. And that's what pleasure play is. And the development of pleasure play, it's learning how to balance the force of work, all the required objectives for the needs of fulfillment of our human experience. These are our responsibilities to ourselves, our responsibilities to others, our environment, our community, and the objective responsibilities towards what we're learning, how we're growing, how we're behaving around others. That's the work, no matter how old you are. But when in early development, when we're taught that play is the balancing force to that, we're excited to play. Play is the rejuvenation of that. Going back to the battery, it's kind of draining a little bit. We need to charge it. And so play or pleasure play can be anything that recharges, that life force. It's anything that adds to or restores, the life force, the capacity you have for the life force, which you need to work. And so anything that recharges the battery is pleasure play. And that can be a peaceful activity, a relaxing activity, or that can be an exhilarating activity, a fun activity, an exciting activity. It ranges. That's why I put the musical notes on there, because the pleasure play can be a range of many things. And so when we have a healthy development through, pleasure and play, it's like I like the Montessori sort of structure or framework. We are more inclined and more aligned with the Steiner framework of early development. Ari will be going to Waldorf next year because they really do honor and sanctify the pleasure play principle as something essential to every child, and they build it into the rhythms of the day. And so, and that is another point that'll take me on a little side tangent, but that's okay. When we talk about rhythms, if you're working, you wake up at 6 a.m., you take a shower, you get ready, you grab something to eat, you get in the car, you drive to work, you're already working. And then you get to work and you work until 5 and you get back in the car. Maybe you go to the gym, maybe you don't. If you do, that could be play, as long as you are performing whatever you're doing at the gym as a means to recharge, as a means that this is exhilarating. But if you're doing it because it's another responsibility you've made to yourself to do, then it's work. So anyway, that aside, you get in the car at 5, you're driving home, you're still working. You get home and you take your jacket, you put your stuff off, you kick off your shoes. For women, we just like throw the bra and, okay, what's for dinner, and then you see yourself sighing a lot, and then you're making dinner. That's still work. And by the time you sit down, you finish your meal, you've cleaned up, now it's time to go to bed. Where was the play? This is common. This is the normal routine that most adults, after 30 years old, especially if you're married, you start having kids, that's the routine. And so if we don't have the rhythm of inserting play and pleasure throughout our day, we have no balancing force against the work. And that's why we burn ourselves out so quickly. And so as children, if we learn that play is really important, then we grow up to be very healthy in terms of the development that we were gifted. And we know how to balance it all without anxiety. Like, ooh, I shouldn't be playing right now. Ooh, this is it. I need to put this down the priority list. And, so even as adults, then we can learn even throughout the work day, throughout that routine, we can create rhythm in that routine, that things are playing. Even that means when you wake up at 6 a.m., you go take a shower, start getting ready, turn on some fun music, dance while you're getting ready, like add some play and pleasure into that rhythm. And then you're driving in the car. Maybe there's a 20-minute commute. And that's kind of boring, right? You're listening to music, you're listening to podcasts. Is that fun? Is that pleasure? Some things that this very simple thing I've been telling clients for almost 12 years now, it has made such a huge impact on so many of my clients. I'm saying, turn off the radio, turn off the podcast, turn off the audiobook, turn on the comedy channel on Spotify, Pandora, whatever you want to use, like turn on a comedian and you're laughing, just laughing on your way to work. And you can have like little sparks of like things that when you're laughing and having an exhilarating kind of experience of joy on your way to work in that uninterrupted like pleasure experience, you may have things slip in that inspire something that just came out of nowhere. Like, oh my gosh, that I could totally do this at work, or like, oh, so-and-so is always kind of grumpy. I know what I can make their day by doing this, or like a creative spark, right? So pleasure play is really important for that balancing that life force that can actually make your work better. And just like I said earlier about, then we go to the gym. Maybe we go to the gym or a yoga class at lunch, and then we go back to work. As long as you're doing that and that purpose, that movement has purpose, to be pleasurable, to restore or add to the life force in a pleasurable and fun way, perfect. Like that's amazing. But if you're going because like, I got to get 4 workouts in a day because I really want to lose 15 pounds by summer, like then it's work. So it doesn't mean you have to stop doing it, but like just change how you approach it. Instead of doing like this regimented, rigid ABCD program, like go in there and be like, what do I feel like doing? How do I want to move my body? What do I want to work out today? It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to match, the bodybuilder magazine's cutout program or whatever, it just go in there and like, how do I want to move my body? Where do I want to go? And like, how heavy do I want to lift? Do I want to lift, or do I just want to like cycle, or do I want to stretch for a little bit? Like just that becomes your play. And so if you approach working out that way, I mean, you're adding that into your rhythm. That's anything that balances, restores, and adds to your life force. And so I didn't put in here like the excess or the unexpressed, underdeveloped, overdeveloped part of it, because no matter what, if this is overdeveloped, it's going to look like all of these. Not that one. So all of these. It all funnels. All of those elements funnel into your pleasure play, and so even if you have a healthy, say, pleasure play development, if you have an overexcited, overexpressed development of desire, needs, emotions, and movement, it will lead to a dysfunction in your approach to the pleasure and play, which ultimately, that's what we want sex to be. That's how we want to experience our sexuality and our sexual experiences. We want those experiences and the way we express ourselves to be something that adds to or restores our vitality. And so whether you were allowed to play as a kid or not allowed to play as a kid, what we important thing I'm sharing here is ultimately we are looking for pleasure. We are looking to play. We are looking to restore and add to our life force. And so that is the sixth element, but you really want to investigate and do an inventory of the first five elements in development, because those will affect this one and how you approach sexual experiences, how you express your sexuality, and how you perceive yourself as a sexual being. That one's really difficult for a lot of women, most women, to embrace, that you are a sexual being. And sometimes there are women that become, again, they dabble in some of these peak experiences, or they meet with the wild woman, but they never develop into the creator, the mother of their life, of their career, of their home, or whatever. So they get stuck in this wild woman, the wild woman energy, the feral. And there's more past that expression of the self. That's when your sexual identity, you become possessed by it. You're actually almost afraid to let go of it, because that's who you are. That's how other people see you, and that's how you're loved and given attention, and that's how you're affirmed. Maybe that's how you get your money, your sponsors, or whatever. It could be a source of life in all things in your areas, the life into your environment, the life into your relationships, the life into your bank account may come from how you identified as a sexual being. And then there's the fear of actually embracing you are a sexual being. And so when we do the inventory, of the first five elements, we get to know ourselves very well and understand ourselves in this sixth element of pleasure and play, because that's the dance, that's the experience of ourselves as sexual beings, and the experience of ourselves through others in sexual experiences, and that's where we get to know that person. We get to know that energy of ourselves, and we know how to harmonize it with others. We know how to discern and choose and make those experiences meaningful and with purpose, because we have an understanding and an empathy of the other person as a sexual being that also has the senses and the movement and the emotions and the needs, all of it. And so that will lead us into next week, where we dive into okay, so we've got the six elements of development that shape us as a sexual being. Then how do those filter into the four principles of Eros? And so we'll talk about that, because the four principles of Eros, if we can just figure out how to harmonize those in terms of our relationship to self as a sexual being and sexual experiences with others in intimacy, then we are living and expressing a very healthy sexual energy, life, understanding, beingness, all of it. So that the healthy sexual expression, healthy sexual experiences will be expressed through the understanding of ourselves in the six elements, and through the lens of the 4 principles of Eros. Did I do good? Is that a
Sarah, you've given
too
us
much?
a lot to think about and a lot to kind of chew on and marinate.
Yeah, well, like I said, next week we'll talk about that. Emotional intimacy and the playful pleasure. Like I said, playful pleasure is that's a defining moment of understanding who we are. Sensual pleasure and reverence for the other person. Those are the 4 principles of Eros, and if we can learn how to harmonize and dance through those through the understanding of ourself and our development and what shaped us and what experiences do we want to have, what are we seeking out, and so what do we need to do in order to add to that, to restore it, reclaim it, redefine it, whatever it is, so that we can be the full embodiment of those 4 principles of Eros.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was a great framework to work from.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you again. Like I said in the very beginning, you really sparked me to put all of the work that I do, sort of like behind the scenes, into something that I've never put forward before, and this is great. It's been fun. Not something I would have thought of, and so, yeah, being inspired by you and getting, you charge my current sometimes. So I really appreciate that. This was all in there, and you inspired me to share it with the world. And I hopefully those who are watching or listening had some good takeaways. And if you have any more questions, you want to know more, obviously always come find us at Bodhi Building Institute. There's a free membership. There's also a paid membership we call the Mastery, which is weekly 2, sometimes 3 hours of just Q&A, peer reviewing, sharing, growing, getting better, whether it's physically, health issues, nutrition, fitness, wisdoms, integration, our conscious development, our relationships, all of it. Office hours are awesome. Yeah, and you'll find the courses in there too. With the Mastery membership, you have free access to all the courses indefinitely. And we have members in there who, have taken some of the courses 3-4 times already. Like they're just, well, I do it too. Like I know there are some of the courses that I write, but I also do my own courses. They're just very getting back to the basics, resetting your life, resetting the definitions of the principles in which you live through, based upon certain transitions and changes and seasons, and it's all in there. And so hopefully you had some good takeaways from this. Hopefully we see you over at Bodhi Building, and we'll see you next week. We'll dive into the 4 principles of Eros. All right, see you then.